Hey folks, you know now that there's a need for conservation of striped bass, many anglers are turning to other species such as snakeheads and blue catfish. I want to talk about another non-native species that is really coming on strong in the mid-Atlantic region. Redear Sunfish. Shellcrackers we call them. They're a challenge to catch, but for those of us who understand the fun of catching panfish, it can be some fantastic fishing. Shellcrackers are native to the southeastern states, but they've now been stocked in just about all the farm ponds and lakes in the mid-Atlantic region. You might have missed them because they don't always behave like other sunfish such as bluegill or red-breasted sunfish. Fortunately, the state departments of natural resources have stocked them in a lot of public water, so you don't have to go tramping across somebody's property to find them. Shellcrackers get bigger and fight harder than any other sunfish. Once they're hooked, they make long, drag-screaming runs. They don't just circle like bluegill. State records in the Chesapeake Bay region is only 2 to 3 pounds, but I don't think those records are going to hold up long because these fish are getting more and more prolific and they can grow up to 5 pounds. If you've watched any of my previous videos or read my books, you know that a float and a tiny feather fly is my absolute favorite technique. It'll catch virtually any species, but it's especially effective for shellcrackers. Here's how to do it. When I'm targeting shellcrackers, I slide the float up the line so that it's just deep enough to either barely touch the bottom or to ride just over the bottom. That way, every time I pop the float, the fly rises and falls off the bottom. It's very similar to the technique we use when we're snap jigging for rockfish. You need a small round float, no bigger than a dime, for a couple of reasons. One, because it provides more action to the lure. It provides a faster frequency to that little fly. And the other reason is because shellcracker strikes can be very subtle. Sometimes you won't see them at all. It's just a little change in the action of the float. You'll never see those strikes with a weighted float or with a great big bobber. Fish it with a very regular cadence, stopping occasionally. If you see any change in the action of that float, if it lays over on its side, if it moves a little bit different than it had the previous snap, set the hook. Shellcrackers spawn in early summer once water temperatures reach 80 degrees or so. They sweep out beds that look like dozens of craters on the bottom, that each one is about the size of a wash tub. They'll bed in very shallow water if the conditions are right, and that's a good time to use one of my other favorite techniques, and that's simply a hopper-dropper setup using a fly rod. Fly fishing for red ears isn't hard, but there are some specifics you need to know. For example, while most sunfish will eagerly take a floating fly off the surface, red ears usually won't because they like to feed closer to the bottom. They prefer to eat periwinkles, snails, and small mussels. They have teeth inside their mouth that can crush those shells, thus the name shellcracker. They're also opportunistic, so they'll also eat crayfish or even a minnow imitation if you get it close to them. That hopper and dropper setup isn't anything new, and there's a couple of ways you can do it. First of all, you need to use a very buoyant fly, something that floats very high. For example, a grasshopper imitation or some kind of terrestrial imitation. There's a couple of ways you can tie it on. You can just use a double uni knot and use the tag end to attach the dropper, the nymph, or you can just tie it to the bend of the hook. That'll work just fine too. Here's what it looks like. Shellcrackers are great to eat, but I'm reluctant to take too many home just because I'd like to see the populations increase even farther. When you find a good colony, it's a good idea to preserve it. Most hardcore panfish anglers will tell you that it's their favorite fish, and I'm no exception. To quote the great Lefty Kreh in a conversation I once had with him about shellcrackers, he said, "If shellcrackers got as big as rockfish, they'd jump in the boat and bust your mouth." There's an entire section on catching shellcrackers and many other panfish species, including these techniques I talked about and many others, in my book, How to Catch Chesapeake Panfish. I hope you'll pick one up there in all the local tackle shops, and you can also find them on Amazon.com or on my website, ChesapeakeLikeTackle.com. For now, let's go fishing.